Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz First Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the Sri Lankan economy. The climate of political uncertainty continues to prevail over the country in spite of a mini cabinet reshuffle and several rounds of meetings between the political leaders of this country. Meanwhile, it was reported in the newspapers this week that the President has decided to disband the Cabinet Committee on Economic Management, previously headed by the Prime Minister. It's possible that this was taken against a backdrop where the new National Economic Council, led by the President, has been introduced as the main economic policy-making body. We have more on these stories coming up on the show. First, a look at tonight's top stories.
Amid political uncertainty triggered by the outcome of the local government polls, the new State Minister of National Policies and Economic Affairs, Dr. Harsha De Silva, assured that efforts to stabilize and reform the economy will continue.
No, macro stability is critical. We have to maintain macro stability. Without macro stability, nothing else would really necessarily move in the right direction. The government is not planning on abandoning what we started. However, we may not be able to maintain the same speed of the things that have already begun. So we are concerned that in the next couple of years that we have some serious challenges on the macroeconomic front. But the government is very responsible, I must say that. We are not going to just let loose just for political expediency. So you can expect the kind of stability that we have created thus far to be maintained in the coming years.
Minister De Silva's assurances come in the backdrop of concerns raised by economists that political instability and confusion may negatively impact economic growth. In the wake of prolonged uncertainty and the lack of clarity, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce also flagged concerns of the possibility of investors moving away from Sri Lanka and economic reforms taking a back seat.
The loss that you could have with this level of political uncertainty is you might lose some of the investors who are now ready to commit money. The approvals which are in the BOI in the pipeline, which will come into effect in 2018. If you lose them, I think that's the biggest loss that can happen, and they'll be taking a more watch and wait kind of approach. But we must not lose that window of opportunity that's there.
Fernando said with only a 2-year term left, the window for wholesale reforms is narrowing and that the government should focus on delivering provisions in the budget for 2018.
I think things like a pricing formula for fuel and electricity, I think may be too difficult. I think we have to realistically look at that. I know the IMF has put a target of March and September as goalposts for cabinet approval for that to take place. I think it'll be difficult to get that across in this phase. But I think even policy priority in terms of maintaining at least macro stability will go along. The time frame to do big wholesale reforms, the window may have been almost quite narrow towards it. So I think what the government could maybe focus on is delivering what they have sort of said, getting some of the provisions in the budget for 2018 that was announced last November, getting them sort of those things online and acting as an enabler rather than thinking, oh, we need to do 5-10 things within the next 18 months and fail at most of it. I know it will be difficult when the elections will be coming in all shapes and forms to commit towards the fiscal consolidation path, improving your revenue, keeping expenditure under control. So balancing that, I think, will be quite difficult.
Finance Minister Mangala Samaravira said emerging economies like Sri Lanka will face tighter credit conditions and higher interest rates, with policy rates in developed nations set to rise faster than expected.
We have seen signs of robust recovery in advanced economies, steadily firming inflation outlook and improving labor market conditions. This suggests that policy interest rates in advanced economies would rise at a faster pace resulting in tighter global financial market conditions. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook report issued last month state, I quote, "The tightening of global financial conditions would have implications for global asset prices and capital flows, leaving economies with high gross debt, refinancing needs and unhedged dollar liabilities, particularly exposed to financial distress."
He made these remarks at the technical sessions of the International Group of 24 on International Monetary Affairs and Development in Colombo. Addressing the group meeting, he urged its members to focus more on developing countries as they face tougher challenges in repaying debt.
The IMF forecasts the gross financing needs for 2018 in emerging and middle-income economies range from 4% to 43% of the GDP, with an average of 10.4%. In many developing economies, a high proportion of this outstanding debt is held by non-residents. This creates added complexities in the policy response. It is clear that Sri Lanka, like many developing countries, faces such refinancing risks in the coming years. This warrants a concerted and coordinated policy response to mitigate such risk.
With global interest rates expected to rise, the G24 group is focusing on debt management.
On the other side of the break, we'll be joined by the Chief Economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Shiran Fernando, to talk about the uncertain political climate and the challenges that it poses to the economic reform agenda. Welcome back to Biz First Review 360. We are not going to abandon what we have done. However, we may not be able to maintain the same speed of the things which have already begun. This was the sentiment expressed by the now State Minister of National Policies and Economic Affairs, Dr. Harshad De Silva, at a recent meeting in Colombo. To talk about this, the uncertain political climate and the future of the Sri Lankan economy, we are joined by Shiran Fernando, Chief Economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Shiran, thank you for coming on the show once again. Let me start by asking you, when the State Minister said that the government is not planning on abandoning what has already been done, but they may not be able to maintain the speed, what does that tell you? Is it dark and ominous?
So thanks for inviting me back on the show. I was at this particular forum when he did mention it, and I thought it was a good statement to make, because I think the question that was on everyone's mind is, will they now abandon a lot of the policies that they were talking about, put all of it out the window and just think merely on the political outcomes and facing the next election. So mentioning, or at least saying that still the window is still open for economic reforms, I think was a good point. And him mentioning about the pace, I think is a more realistic way to look at it. But
when you're talking about pace, this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, you've got a year and a half.
Yes. So when he talks about pace, I think you have to put it in a relative context. Already the reforms that were taking place in the last 3 years, to a lot of the public's knowledge as well as some of the private sector, is not happening at a speed that's acceptable or is good enough for things to take place. So that pace comment, though it is practical, I would say that yes, maybe some of the bigger reforms which are quite difficult, maybe some things like labor reforms or things like that they want to push through, maybe yes, take it a bit more slower given the political environment. But I think the outcomes of the election sort of signal that some of the other things need to get prioritized, and the ones that do get prioritized need to get delivered. And that's my thinking on that. But overall, I think it was good that he came out and stated this.
Following yesterday's forum, do you feel that there's a renewed sense of confidence on the part of the business sector, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce? Do you feel confident in the ability of this administration to deliver?
So I think as an economist, what we've been sort of stating at forums as well as to a lot of the delegations that even have come after the 10th of February is that what's really important now is to see where the macro stability is. So prior to the elections, there was a sense, or at least the 6 to 8 months prior to that, you were building up a bit of stability. You saw, better FDI numbers, exports growing to the highest level it has been. The KR also showing a bit of stability. So a lot of things were getting right on the macro front. And the key thing that we were sort of emphasizing was that, will this be lost? And I think the statement, I think it's too early to tell because he made it on Tuesday, is whether other ministers and the cabinet or the government as a whole collectively agree on it. But it's a good starting point, at least the minister that's responsible for economic affairs mentioning or alluding to the fact that stability is a priority. Because I think for 2 years they've been trying.
But the key thing is, ultimately he is the state minister.
Yes.
I mean, upgraded from deputy to state, but still state minister. The Minister for Economic Affairs is the Prime Minister, and the people responsible for economic affairs now are the National Economic Council, which brings me to my next question. We heard, it was reported via the newspapers that the President had disbanded the Cabinet Committee on Economic Management, which was chaired by the Prime Minister, included key advisors, the Finance Secretary, etc. Now, I expect that because of the formation of the National Economic Council headed by the President, that was why this decision was taken. But in this climate of sort of uncertainty, when people are looking, especially even the Governor of the Central Bank, who had said that Sri Lanka needs political stability urgently, in this background, what do you make of these moves? So on the including the cabinet reshuffle as well.
So on the comment on the CCM disbanded, I don't have too much clarity to explain to you, but I think on the National Economic Council, I think for the viewers out there as well, it was formed in, I think, September of last year, spearheaded by an economist as well, but consists of members such as the Prime Minister in it. So, I mean, the structure is there which might actually streamline the process, where once it's approved by Cabinet, you don't have statements maybe countering it or going against it by either the President or the Prime Minister. But if you have this National Economic Council that's vetting everything and has the approval or the okay from the President, who is also sitting on it, then you might not see too much of the political debating on certain economic issues, which we've got accustomed to in the last 3 years, be it either the VAT issue, where there has been a lot of back and forth between either the President or the Prime Minister in terms of policy direction. So, I mean, I would see it in a different light if it streamlines the process, and maybe both CCM and NEC integrates into one and collectively is able to provide policy direction. That might actually.
Do you expect there to be more efficient, streamlined, and cohesive policy making coming out of the NEC?
I might expect it to, but I don't know whether how the structure will enable it to maybe sometimes put it out quicker, whether they will deliberate more on it, try to make sure it's more inclusive, try to see it in the broader context of all the national priorities, and whether then the whole prioritization will happen. But if it does streamline this process, then at least we're sure that something approved by Cabinet will not on a later date be countered, or something against that will come about. So that is the hope, and I think that's maybe the angle we should probably look at it, but the days come will provide more clarity on it. But the National Economic Council was not something that just came out just a few days back. It has been in the works for a while.
There's a series of elections that are coming up. As we mentioned earlier, there's a year and a half left before the term of the President ends, a little over that before the term of the Parliament ends, and in the meantime, this year we're going to see provincial council elections, possibly a presidential election next year, and parliamentary elections thereafter. In this backdrop, the Governor of the Central Bank echoed a fear that all of us had, that if this leads to a loosening of fiscal policy or greater budget deficits, that the central bank would have to lean back against that and tighten monetary policy. he says that there needs to be political stability as quickly as possible. Do you envision in the near future an environment where there can be some sort of political stability?
So I think the political outlook is as good, my guess is as good as yours, or my outlook is good as yours, but I think what's really important is how that will affect. If it does get better, then and the decision making does improve, then it would maybe build on the stability of the economy that was there prior to the elections. But if it does get derailed, then you need to figure out, okay, or policymakers need to figure out, the government needs to prioritize what goes on within policy, whether there is space, for example, for where the rupee moves, or from where the interest rates also move, because one must not forget that we're still going through this IMF program as well, and the key part of the program is on fiscal consolidation, which is in a sense, reduce your budget deficits, make sure your revenues go up. So that has to continue at least till the middle of next year.
On that, I want to draw your attention to the comments that you made at this forum. You said that Sri Lanka is moving towards a stable state with tax revenues and investment outlook improving, and that there are higher levels of FDI and an uptick in exports were positive signs. Quite optimistic.
Yeah, so I think, well, it's always in a relative context. I think that's part I didn't mention. But if you look, regaining, for example, on the export front, regaining GSP Plus in particular has built up a momentum in the second half of in 2017. You saw exports, I think, almost growing around 10 to 15%.
Do the numbers support this
yes
optimistic outlook?
It does. It's purely from the numbers. So exports have picked up. The markets.
FDIs have also.
FDIs also picked up. FDI numbers, I think you have to factor in the fact that there is proceeds from the Hammata release agreement as well as from the Chinese the Port City project as well in the mix. But underlying, it has picked up compared to the 800 million in 2016. It's gone to about 1.6 billion. So overall, it has picked up. But what the 2017 numbers show is that it took a while for it to get there, and it took about 2 years for this stability to be achieved. And overnight, if this is lost with the political instability, then we're going to lose the momentum once again. And when you go into 2019 and 2020, there is a bit of a debt bunch up as well, which needs to be refinanced as well. So 2018 was that year where the government, the central bank governor, would have been able to take, or still is able to take, more proactive steps to mitigate that. And that's why we also went in the theme of building on stability.
On that note, I have one final question for you. The central bank has expected 5.5% GDP growth, economic growth this year. Given the sort of unstable political climate, and the questions that then raises, and the challenges that then poses to the economy and the economic reform agenda, do you think that this 5 to 5.5% growth rate is still viable?
So even prior to the elections, I think our view that we put out even in some of our publications was a growth rate of between 4.5 to 5%, simply because you will get what you call this base effect, because last year we had the worst drought in 40 years, and that, you can't ignore that fact as well. I think listening to a presentation yesterday, I think still reservoir storage levels are similar or slightly higher than what it was same time last year. So you can't eliminate that fact, but you do not expect it to be as bad as how it was last year. So base effects might kick in and push up agriculture, which has not done too well. And you're seeing, I think, some of the other sectors, such as maybe construction, continuing to do well. So we don't necessarily see 5.5. I think that will require real political stability, and that to be driven a lot by investments, which now may take a bit of a backseat, and a lot of the foreigners will be also re-evaluating and thinking and waiting for more stability. But where it could be driven is through exports, which also plays into the whole equation of GDP as well. So if that continues that momentum, simply just going on the exports to the EU, which has taken off, and other markets that are envisaged, then we might see a 4.5 to 5%, which which doesn't sound that great, but at least it's an upward move from what it was in 2017.
Sriram Fernando, thank you very much for taking time off and coming on the show. We look forward to talking to you as the situation develops. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to the show. Finally on tonight's program, Sri Lankan Airlines. 2 words that will send a shiver up every Sri Lankan spine. On the restructuring of the airline, 6 of the airline's trade unions have come together to form an alliance so as to speak with one voice, among them the Pilots Guild of Sri Lanka, of Sri Lankan Airlines as well. At a joint media briefing convened last Friday, they aired their thoughts on the restructuring process. They noted that they would support such a process as long as it is transparent and inclusive, in the sense that the unions are also consulted. Tonight on Speak Your Mind, we have a listen to what they had to say.
The losses to the airline is not because of the employees. It is due to the management. Any entity that is running at a loss is due to the management, not due to the failure of any employees. So, direction, the management is responsible to turn it around. At no point are we saying we are not supportive of a restructuring process or anything, but that process should be done in a transparent manner. So I think the right to information that we have requested will give us a better understanding, because it is this present board of directors and the chairman, I believe, that is challenging in this decision, or the consensus to challenge it. So having this information will give us the opportunity to see exactly what has happened regarding the lease cost of the 350, the cancellation, because like I said, transparency is essential, and we believe that Sri Lankan Airlines has to disclose this information because it's public money, and they have challenged the decision to disclose it, but we believe that the Commission will give a fair hearing to our concern, so that information will highlight more details regarding the leasing of these aircraft. For example, it could be stated that the cancellation of the 350, approximately $90 million, did we have that money to pay the $90 million? Then, is there any interest component on top of the $90 million? Let's put another $40 million for that. So, were we able to make that one-time payment? Was it the correct decision to do? This information, if we as trade unions get it, we also are affiliated with other international bodies, we can get a certain amount of input whether these decisions were right. So the main objective of us to get this information is for transparency. In another way, closure of the airline may be an option for the government to do, but then also the impact of the closure also has to be analyzed, because what after you close the airline, what are you going to do? You still have to pay the banks. Then also the employees, compensation for the employees. Then also these, I believe some of these aircraft, if not all, probably are having sovereign bonds where the government has guaranteed for it. So its closure is not as easy, because does the country have that type of money to put in just to close it down to begin with? That is number one. I need to emphasize that as the Pilots Guild and with all the other unions here, our objective is whether this government stays for 2 years or another government comes in or whatever, that is not our concern. Our objective is that this airline is managed properly and in a transparent way. And we have all individually done whatever we can to get some attention to this area, but the purpose of us all getting together as a collective voice, I believe that we can create a change in the way things are happening. As long as Sri Lankan Airlines, I think for any partner to come in, Sri Lankan Airlines has to have some sort of sustainability. At the present time, our concern is that, is there sustainability? I mean, are we heading in that direction? From 3 years have gone by, and all of us have got together, because we as employees also feel that the airline should be first brought to a stable status. And once it is manageable, yes, I'm sure that there may be other people. For us, our priority is the sustainability of Sri Lankan Airlines before we go any further. So that is the reason that we have got together to make sure that we represent all the major employee segments of the airline, that there is sustainability of this company, and that also they can use whatever resources available from us to come about that change over numerous period. I mean, it can't be pointed in one particular period as such. This airline has been more politically motivated or managed than commercially. So starting from the appointments, it has to be with a commercial objective, not a political objective. So that is why we are all together today, to first get sustainability. We don't know whether the board is actually functional. So, I mean, if we are going to have some sort of direction in the company, there has to be a functioning board, a chairman and CEO. And our objective here is that whoever is managing this uses the resources available, and also for it to be transparent. So our objective, our aim is to support any restructuring process, but at the same time request from those that have the ability to appoint people who can achieve the objective. It is, I would say, pointless to talk about the losses of the airline if we have the wrong people in the wrong positions. So I think that needs to be addressed first.
And that's a wrap of Biz First Review 360. I'll see you again same time, same place next week. Don't forget to look us up on Facebook. I'm Nadim Majid. Good night and good luck.